Imagine, just for a moment, a world where the global calendar starts at year zero.
Right.
But year zero isn't the birth of a savior or, the founding of a republic. It's not the signing of some great peace treaty.
No, definitely not.
It is the date of a highly successful industrialized genocide.
Yeah. Weak.
I mean, that is the timeline of the world we're talking about today.
Sure.
Every single time you write down the date or every time you celebrate a birthday, you are literally measuring the distance from the day an entire civilization was systematically wiped off the face of the earth.
It's a terrifying concept.
Right. And what if I told you that this isn't like the premise of some grim, dark adult fantasy novel? It's the literal foundational lore of your favorite brightly colored childhood cartoon.
It completely shatters that warm, fuzzy illusion of safety, doesn't it? I mean, we like our nostalgia to be visible and neatly categorized.
Exactly.
You want the good guys in one corner, the bad guys in the other, and, a really clear moral lesson by the time the credits...
For sure. But then you step back into the world of this one specific animated classic as an adult, and suddenly you are just watching a fun martial arts adventure anymore.
No, not at all.
You are looking at a narrative landscape that is honestly just terrifying.
It is the absolute definition of hiding horrifying realities in plain sight. Like, it's a masterclass in Trojan horsing incredibly heavy themes into a Sunday morning time slot.
It really is.
Yeah.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are so incredibly glad you are joining us. Today, we're looking at a beloved, seemingly family-friendly animated masterpiece Avatar, The Last Airbender.
Yes.
But we aren't here to talk about the whimsical adventures. We're not talking about the funny animal sidekicks or the cool elemental martial art.
No, we were looking at the subtext. The things the creators somehow miraculously snuck past the network censors.
Exactly. And we're getting our material today from a deeply researched transcript provided by the YouTube channel called Sleepy Appa, which just does a phenomenal job of exploring the dark lore of this series.
They really do. The research is incredible.
It is. So the mission for you, me, and our expert today is to just strip away that bright animation. We're going to peel back the comedic moments and look straight at the adult realities the show hid right in front of our faces.
This is going to be a heady one.
Yeah, it is. Because over the course of our time today, we're exploring the terrifying mechanics of genocide, the profound psychological and physiological toll of child soldiering, existential cosmic horror, and the incredibly uncomfortable truth about post-war justice. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, so to really understand the trauma of these characters, right, to understand why Aang, Katara, and Zuko act the way they do, you first have to understand the systemic, brutal machine that caused that trauma.
Right, the Fire Nation.
Exactly, because how does an empire sustain a 100-year global war? It doesn't start with magic, it starts with logistics.
Logistics, yeah.
And those logistics start with the air nomad genocide. And, I use the word genocide very intentionally here. It wasn't a tragic mythological event that just happened off-screen by accident.
No, it was a highly calculated strategic military operation ordered by Fire Lord Sozin.
Exactly. And when you really look at the logistics of it, it's chilling. Sozin knew how the Avatar cycle worked, right? Fire, air, water, earth. It's a continuous loop of reincarnation.
Right.
So Avatar Roku, a firebender, had just died. This means Sozin mathematically knew the next Avatar was going to be an airbender.
Which gave him a very specific, terrifyingly narrow window. Because, he had roughly a 12 to 16-year window before that new Avatar was discovered, started formal training, and became a genuine world-ending threat to his imperial ambitions.
Exactly. He had to strike fast. But here is the massive logistical nightmare for an invading force. All air nomads were benders.
Hold on, let me stop you right there, because I think a lot of people miss this detail when they watch the show as kids. They didn't have a non-bending civilian population at all.
None. Zero. Due to their really high spiritual connection as a culture, every single person born to the air nomads had the ability to manipulate air.
Wow. Okay, so think about what that means for an invading army. You can't just march into a village, line everyone up, and pick out the one kid who can bend the elements.
Right, exactly. There was absolutely no way to simply identify the Avatar. I mean, they all wore the identical saffron orange robes. They all had the same arrow tattoos once they reached a certain level of mastery.
And they could all fight, technically.
Yeah. They were culturally trained as pacifists, sure, but they were highly evasive, agile martial artists capable of defending themselves against almost any physical attack.
Right.
So Sudinzin couldn't hold auditions. He couldn't interrogate them to find the right kid. Complete extermination became the only, quote-unquote, efficient imperial option from a purely tactical standpoint.
It was industrialized murder.
It really was.
I mean, picture the sheer horror of that. The air temples were located at the highest peaks of mountain.
Yeah.
Completely inaccessible by foot.
Yeah, you had to fly to get there.
Right. So Vezin had to wait for a comet that vastly amplified firebending power, essentially turning his soldiers into living flamethrowers. And then he used that brief window to launch a multi-pronged, coordinated assault on incredibly hard-to-reach monasteries filled with flying monks.
It's an insane military operation when you break it down.
And the detail that always gets me is what we talked about right at the start, the calendar. The global calendar in this universe is AG, after genocide.
Just sit with that for a second. Imagine if our real-world calendar started counting from the Holocaust.
Oh, man.
Right. Imagine if we wrote the date based on the year a specific group of people was almost entirely wiped out. That is the energy, the sheer geopolitical arrogance that the Fire Nation brought to the rest of the world.
They didn't just erase the air nomads, they made that erasure the defining, inescapable moment of modern history.
Exactly. Everyone, even the nations actively fighting against them, has to use their calendar.
It's just this massive assertion of absolute dominance, like, we killed them and now you'll measure your lives by it.
Yeah.
But it didn't end there, did it? Because killing the airbenders was only phase 1. If Nang had died in that attack, the Avatar spirit would have simply reincarnated into the next element in the cycle.
Which is water. Which brings us to the tragedy of the Southern Water Tribe. And the Fire Nation's approach here was entirely different, which shows a terrifying adaptability in their military strategy.
Yeah.
It wasn't just one massive comet-powered battle like with the air nomads. It was genocide by installment.
Genocide by installment plan.
That is a horrifying phrase.
But it's exactly what it was. Methodical, decades-long rape. The Fire Nation didn't just invade and occupy the frozen South.
Because there was nothing there to occupy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was no strategic resource there for them. They just sent black steel warships periodically to hunt down and eliminate waterbenders. They would show up, terrorize the villages, and over decades they systematically captured or killed anyone who showed even the slightest ability to bend water.
It is the cold, calculated logic of pest control applied to human beings.
It really is. And we actually see the devastating intimate result of this in the very first episode through Katara and Sokka, and it culminates in the backstory of their mother, Kaya. When I rewatched the show, this scene absolutely broke me because she wasn't just collateral damage in a random skirmish. She wasn't hit by a stray blast.
No, it was deeply personal and highly targeted.
The raiders came into her home looking specifically for the last waterbender in the entire southern tribe. And Kaya, an ordinary woman with no magical abilities whatsoever, looked this ruthless Fire Nation commander in the eye and lied.
Yeah.
She said it was her. She claimed to be the waterbender, knowing with absolute certainty she would be executed on the spot just to protect her young daughter, Katara.
It's so heavy. And think about what that does to Katara. When Katara finally learns waterbending, it isn't just a cool skill.
No.
Her entire existence, her ability to practice her culture's art, is entirely defined by a multi-generational, systematic plan to genocide the Avatar out of it. Every time she moves water, she is actively defying the empire that murdered her mother.
That's such a profound way to look at it.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to ask yourself a deeply uncomfortable question.
Which is, how does a nation justify this to its own people?
Exactly. How does an empire sustain this level of atrocity, not just for a few years, but for an entire century?
Well, the answer is incredibly mundane and therefore incredibly scary. It ends in the class.
Okay, unpack that for me. Because we see the Fire Nation from the outside as this monolithic evil empire. But what does it actually look like from the inside?
Fire Nation doesn't teach its children they are evil conquerors. They don't have posters up saying, hey, let's go commit atrocity.
Right. They frame it as a noble endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
It's the classic white man's burden narrative repackaged for a fantasy setting.
Exactly. They teach their youth that the Fire Nation is experiencing this golden age of industry, wealth, and progress. And therefore, they have a moral obligation to share that prosperity with the rest of the...
Like they're doing everyone a favor.
Yes. They genuinely believe they are bringing civilization, order, and enlightenment to savage or underdeveloped nations who simply don't know what's good for them, and honestly should be grateful for the...
Man, that's dark. And when Elding goes undercover and accidentally enrolls in a Fire Nation school later in the series, we see this indoctrination firsthand.
And it's chilling in its banality. Like, the air nomads, the pacifist monks who were completely wiped out are framed in their history books as an aggressive, mobilized...
That's crazy.
The narrative taught to children is that the Fire Nation had to preemptively strike them out of self. Furthermore, the violently occupied territories of the Earth Kingdom are framed as underdeveloped regions that the Fire Nation is generously modernizing with roads and infrastructure.
So what does this all mean for the kids actually growing up in this system? Does it just create a nation of cartoon monsters, or is it something far more complicated and tragic?
It creates completely normal people who believe that committing atrocities is a moral imperative.
Wow.
And I think the most disturbing part of the school sequence is that the teachers aren't cackling villains. They aren't evil. They genuinely believe the lies they are spouting.
Because they learned it from their teachers.
Exactly. They aren't cynical propagandists rubbing their hands together. They are true believers who were taught the exact same lies when they were sitting in those very same desks 20 years prior.
It is nationalism weaponized into fascism generation after generation.
Yep. They are explicitly taught that unquestioning loyalty to the Fire Lord is the highest moral virtue a person can possess. And questioning the state's narrative isn't just rude, it is literal treason.
Which bleeds perfectly into how they handle the occupied territories on the ground. When the show takes us into the Earth Kingdom, we see these Fire Nation colonies scattered everywhere. And it took me a while to realize this isn't just a military occupation where soldiers stand on street corners. It's settler colonialism.
Yeah, it's the complete systemic replacement of culture. In these colonies, Earth Kingdom citizens are strictly forbidden from practicing earthbending. Their legal systems are dismantled, their indigenous language or cultural customs are suppressed, and their economic policies are entirely replaced by Fire Nation structures.
They just completely overwrite the existing society.
Exactly. The native population is forced to the bottom of the social hierarchy. And worse, they force the colonized people to participate in their own oppression. They force Earth Kingdom villagers to mine the coal that literally powers the Fire Nation war machines that will go on to conquer more of their own people.
I've always thought of it like a parasitic vine. You know, vine that wraps around a mighty host tree. It feeds off the tree, slowly suffocating it while growing its own leaves to cover the branches.
That's a great analogy.
And because this war goes on for 100 continuous years, the vine has grown so deeply into the wood that you can't tell where the tree ends and the vine begins. You have entire generations of Fire Nation citizens who were born in these Earth Kingdom colonies. Their parents were.
Yes. By the time the war ends, the vast majority of these colonists have never even seen the Fire Nation homeland. They've never stepped foot on the volcanic islands. To them, the Earth Kingdom is their home.
It muddies the moral waters completely. You have Earth Kingdom natives whose culture and dignity have been systematically erased, living in slums, and you have Fire Nation colonists who are functionally indigenous to the only home they've ever known, living in the mansions above them.
Yeah, and if you just kick the Fire Nation colonists out after the war, where do they go? You're creating a mass refugee crisis of people who technically didn't start the war, even if they benefit. It's a permanent, intractable restructure.
The Fire Nation created a geopolitical situation so complex, so deeply intertwined, that simply undoing it becomes functionally impossible.
That's the truly insidious nature of imperialism. It doesn't just conquer, it permanently alters the DNA of a region so that even in peace, the scars dictate the...
Man. Okay, so we see how the Empire brainwashes its youth in the classroom to maintain the system. But what happens when it actively weaponizes its own children on the battlefield?
Oh, this is where it gets really...
Let's transition to the royal family. Let's talk about Zuko. Every fan knows Zuko. We all accept his scar as an incredibly cool, iconic character design. It's the classic, brooding, tragic backstory marker.
But strip away the cool animation aesthetic, strip away the dramatic music, and what are you actually looking at from a real-world perspective?
You're looking at a 13-year-old boy who was publicly mutilated by his own father.
In an Agni Kai, a formal, culturally sanctioned fire duel.
This is what really messed me up when I rewatched it. The scar wasn't the worst part. It was the crowd.
The audience, yeah.
Hundreds of adults, generals, nobles, family members sat in an arena and cheered while a father burned his own son's face off. And what was Zuko's great crime?
Basic empathy.
Right. He was a kid who spoke out of turn in a war room because he had basic human empathy for a battalion of new, young recruits who were going to be sacrificed as a distraction. He didn't want innocent soldiers to die.
And for that quote-unquote weakness, his father, Fire Lord Ozai, challenged him to a duel.
And when Zuko refused to fight his own dad and fell to his knees begging for mercy, Ozai permanently disfigured him.
This raises a profoundly important question about the culture itself, extending beyond just Ozai being an abusive parent. Ozai didn't break the law.
No.
He didn't violate Fire Nation customs. In fact, he used a deeply respected ancient cultural tradition, the Agni Kai, as a protective cover for unforgivable...
The system not only allowed this child abuse, it celebrated it as a necessary lesson in discipline.
Exact. Zuko's scar isn't just a personal tragedy. It is a permanent physical manifestation that the culture enables towards torture. It is a society that explicitly prioritizes dominance and strength over any shred of...
And if Zuko is the child who was rejected for having empathy, his sister Azula is the child who was perfectly manufactured by this system.
Oh, Zula.
We look at Azula as this terrifying, unhinged, sociopathic villain. But she's just a 14-year-old kid. She is a manufactured child soldier.
Groomed by a megalomaniacal father literally from the day she was born, Ozai saw her natural talent and rewarded her cruelty. He taught her that dominance was the only currency that mattered.
And meanwhile, her mother, Ursa, was horrified.
Right. Ursa recoiled from Azula, famously calling her own daughter a monster. So what does a child learn?
She learns that fear is the only reliable tool for human connection.
Exactly. Love is weak. Love is a liability that gets your face burned off like her brother. Fear is safe. Fear gives...
So when we reach the boiling point of her arc, and her two best friends, Mai and Tai Li, ultimately betray her, not for power, but out of genuine love for others, Azula's entire worldview shatters.
It breaks her brain. She genuinely, fundamentally cannot comprehend.
She is a profound tragedy because she succeeded at everything she was groomed to be. She was the perfect imperial weapon. She conquered the impenetrable city of Ba Sing Se. She quote-unquote killed the Avatar. She was flawless.
But when she finally outlives her usefulness, when Ozai decides to crown himself the Phoenix King and essentially leaves her behind to manage a hollow capital city, she fractures.
Her reward for being the perfect, dutiful imperial asset is a psychotic breakdown, being bound in chains and crying uncontrollably on the ground at age 14.
It's devastating.
It is. But wait, I want to push back on something here. We're talking about the psychological toll, but what about the physical? They're shooting fire and moving massive boulders with their mind. Isn't this just a fantasy show where magic has no real physical consequences? I mean, it's animation. Nobody pulls a hamstring.
Well, that's how we typically... Yeah. But the source transcript brings up a fascinating, horrifying theory about the dark physics of bending.
Okay.
We treat it as an effortless magic system, but think about the biomechanic. Pushing hundreds of pounds of solid rock, like Toph does, or generating literal burning plasma from your internal life force, or cha, should absolutely devastate the human body. What if bending isn't free? What if these characters are dealing with severe chronic pain?
Wow, okay. Think about elite athletes in our world, right? Professional fighters, Olympic gymnasts, marathon runners, they systematically destroy their joints, their ligaments, their cartilage by their mid-20s.
Yeah.
Now imagine developing teenager generating atmospheric lightning from their fingertips.
Exactly. The Fire Nation relies almost entirely on child soldiers and young adults pushing their developing bodies to the absolute physiological limit. What if Azula's breakdown at the end of the series wasn't purely psychological?
Oh, like a physical toll.
Yeah, what if it was also a physical, neurological degradation? She was constantly overusing lightning bending, an incredibly volatile, high-energy tech that her 14-year-old nervous system was simply never biologically meant to sustain.
That makes so much sense. Her erratic behavior, her paranoia, her physical exhaustion, it perfectly mirrors severe neurological burnout.
Which brings us to perhaps the most horrifying, unspoken physical consequence of bending in the entire show.
Combustion Man.
Ah, yes. Combustion Man. The towering silent assassin with the third eye tattoo who shoots devastating, concentrated explosions directly from his forehead.
The show never explains where he comes from. He just shows up in season 3 as this relentless Terminator figure. But the implications of his existence are terrifying.
Truly.
I mean, he doesn't speak. He just grunts.
Yeah.
He has prosthetic metal limbs, heavily implying he's blown his own arms and legs off in the past.
What's fascinating here is the pattern. If we look ahead to the sequel series, The Legend of Korra, we see another combustion bender, a woman named Palai, who also has that exact same distinctive third eye tattoo on her forehead.
Which suggests what?
This suggests that combustion bending isn't just a natural, rare progression of fire bending, like metal bending is for Earth. That third eye tattoo is a marker.
God, like a serial number or a surgical lab subject designation.
Precisely. Combustion Man is almost certainly the result of severe body horror and state-sponsored human experimentation.
That is so grim.
We already know the Fire Nation of studies and tortures captured benders to understand their limit. It is a completely logical, dark extension that they surgically altered or genetically modified their own people's chi pathways to create living, breathing artillery.
So he doesn't speak because whatever they did to his brain or his vocal cords during those experiments broke him.
Right. He isn't a person anymore. He is a broken, surgically altered tool of the state.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If the Fire Nation is willing to experiment on their own citizens' bodies to create weapons, it opens the door to a terrifying question.
What's that?
What happens when bending is used to violate the body and mind directly? And worse, what happens when the supposed good guys are the ones doing it?
Oh, yeah. The ultimate, most visceral violation of bodily autonomy in this universe, bloodbending.
Oh, blood bending.
It was invented by Hama, an elderly Southern Water Tribe bender. Remember those raids we talked about?
Yeah, the decades-long raids.
Well, Hama was captured during those raids and locked in a horrific Fire Nation prison specifically designed to dehydrate. She was tortured, starved, and held in ice for death.
And in her desperation, she realized that the rats scurrying in her cell had water in their blood.
Exactly. She spent years practicing on them, twisting them, controlling, and eventually used that horrific technique on her human guards to walk out of that.
Think about the pure physical sensation of that for a second. You become a conscious prisoner in your own flesh.
It's nightmare.
A bloodbender reaches out, and suddenly they are manipulating the water in your veins, your muscles, the fluid in your brain. You are fully awake, fully aware, but completely powerless as your limbs contort and are forced to move against your will. It is puppetry of the most macabre kind.
It is a profound metaphor for how abuse and trauma get The Fire Nation's systematic cruelty created an environment so desperate that it birthed a technique that conventional torture look up.
And the tragedy is that Hama passes this trauma.
Yes. When she meets Katara, she forces Katara to learn it. She bloodbends Katara's friends Aang and Sokka, turning them into literal meat puppets, forcing them to attack.
Until Katara has no choice but to use bloodbending on Hama to stop her, Hama wins by corrupting the next generation.
It's genuinely horrifying. But, it's not just the dark, gloomy bloodbending that violates autonomy. Look at Ty Lee's chi blocking.
Oh, Ty Lee. The show presents it as this cheerful, bouncy acrobatic. Pink outfit, doing backflips, and playfully poking people.
But look at the underlying mechanics of what she's actually doing. From a physiological standpoint, she is systematically severing the bioelectrical signals of the human nervous system.
Right.
She is using blunt force trauma to specific pressure points to instantly cut off the connection between the brain and the body's motor.
But we just see it as a temporary paralysis, right?
Yeah.
A fun party trick to disarm the heroes so they can escape.
But the terrifying implication is long-term permanent nerve damage. What if repeated chi blocking causes severe scar tissue to form around those sensitive nerve clusters?
Oh, man.
What if the hundreds of Earth Kingdom soldiers she cheerfully disables end up dealing with chronic pain, neuropathy, and a permanent loss of motor function for the rest of their lives?
And that completely changes how you watch those fights.
And the genius of the character is how she masks this lethal, crippling martial art with a bubbly circus persona. It's a survival mechanism.
Because she grew up in a strict, noble family with 6 identical sisters feeling completely invisible.
Exactly. She ran away to a circus where she had to learn how to defend herself against much larger, stronger people. She weaponized her own perceived innocence.
And then there's earthbending.
Yeah.
We always think of earthbending as solid, reliable, and honorable. They plant their feet, they face things head on.
Yeah.
But when you really think about the physics of it, earthbending is the perfect tool for untraceable, silent assassination.
Absolutely. Think about the mechanic. An earthbender could silently open a sinkhole beneath your feet, swallow you into the earth, seal the solid rock back over your head, and walk away.
No body is ever found.
None. There is no murder weapon to trace. There is no forensic evidence left at a crime. Just someone suffocating in a pitch-black living tomb beneath the cobblestones while the earthbender strolls down with...
It changes how you view every single earthbender. Even Toph. Toph's seismic sense, her ability to see by feeling the vibrations in the earth. We think it's this awesome, empowering skill for a blind character, and it makes her the ultimate lie detector for Team Avatar.
But what is lie detection, really? It is a massive, completely non-consensual invasion of privacy.
Seriously.
She can feel your heart rate spike. She can monitor your breathing patterns, your muscle twitches, your involuntary physiological stress response. You cannot hide your fear or your secrets.
She is constantly reading your cardiovascular activity without your consent, monitoring your internal emotional state.
Which is exactly the kind of deep, invasive surveillance that leads us directly to Ba Sing,
the great Earth Kingdom capital city.
Right.
The impenetrable fortress that is supposed to be the ultimate refuge for millions of people fleeing the Fire Nation's advance.
Except it isn't a refuge at all. When our heroes finally arrive, they don't find a sanctuary. They find a totalitarian nightmare.
Run by the ATLA.
Yes, the ATLA,
Yeah.
a secret police force that uses earthbending not to defend the walls, but to build secret underground prisons and silence dissent.
They enforce an incredibly rigid, brutal caste system, literally walling off the city to segregate desperate refugees in the squalid, overcrowded lower ring, while the elite live in oblivious luxury in the upper rings.
And that iconic phrase, "there is no war in Ba Sing Se," it's become a huge internet meme, a joke about denial. But in the context of the show, it is the result of Orwellian thought crime.
Because if you possess inconvenient information, like the fact that a century-long war is happening just outside the walls, the ATLA don't just arrest you, they disappear you to Lake Laogai.
Let's paint the picture of Lake Laogai because the aesthetic is pure psychological.
It really is. It's a secret facility hidden deep in glowing green crystal caves under a serene lake. You have these swinging hypnotic lamps. It is a literal concentration camp designed for psychological torture and brainwashing.
They use forced hypnosis, severe sensory manipulation, and sleep deprivation to literally reach into a person's mind and overwrite their memories, and they break your psyche and rebuild it to serve the state.
The Judies. Oh man, the Judies are so creepy.
So
they are the smiling women who act as official escorts and handlers for important visitors around the city. They all have the exact same name, Judy E. They have the exact same unnerving, frozen smile. They speak in the exact same placid, monotone voice.
Because the woman who existed before was entirely erased.
Mm-hmm.
State-sanctioned erasure of consciousness is one of the most horrifying concepts in science fiction, and it's right here in a kids' show.
Yeah.
The dialogue don't just execute dissenters. They view execution as a waste of... Instead, they delete the offending knowledge, replace it with state-approved propaganda, and send the hollowed-out shell of a person back out into the city to serve the government.
And I want to remind you, this is the Earth Kingdom. These are supposed to be the good guys resisting the Fire Nation. The show makes it explicitly clear that authoritarianism and systemic abuse are not exclusive to the villains.
It's a really mature theme.
Okay, so we've looked at the atrocities humans inflict on each other in the physical world. The genocide, the torture, the brainwash. But you'd think that stepping outside the physical world, moving into the realm of magic and spirit, would offer some sort of salvation or moral clarity?
You would think so.
But it doesn't. In fact, the spiritual realm in this universe is profoundly indifferent and, frankly, terrifying.
Because the spirit world doesn't operate on human logic. It has no concept of human justice, morality, or causality. It operates on ancient, arbitrary rules that change depending entirely on which specific spirit you happen to be dealing with.
Right.
And the physics of it are a nightmare. Time is completely meaningless. You can wander into the spirit world for what feels like an hour, only to find that a century has passed in the physical world.
And what happens to your physical body while your spirit is projecting? It is left completely vulnerable, comatose in the human world, unprotected.
You can just stumble into eternal damnation by accident. Look at the fog of lost souls.
Oh, that's a perfect example. Let's look at Admiral Zhao, the arrogant Fire Nation commander from Season 1 who killed the Moon Spirit. He isn't dead. He wasn't killed in battle.
No, he was physically dragged into the spirit world by the ocean spirit and thrown into the fog of lost.
And this isn't a guarded prison with a warden. It isn't a torture chamber designed by it. It's just a natural feature of the spiritual, literally just a foggy valley.
But the fog itself infects your mind. It infects you with your own deepest insecurities and failures, forcing you to relive your worst memories and traumas on an endless looping cycle for you.
It is a fate vastly, infinitely worse than death.
And to the spirits, it's basically just a geographical feature, like a swamp.
Then there is Ko, the face stealer. Just the name alone gives me chills.
Yeah, Ko is terrifying.
This is an ancient, massive, centipede-like entity that lives in the dark roots of the spirit world. Its rule is simple. If you show any emotion on your face while looking at it, it steals your identity. It literally takes your face.
And think about who has to confront this. Aang, a 12-year-old.
He had to descend into a pitch-black cave and suppress every single human instinct, fear, surprise, empathy, anger, just to survive a conversation with a cosmic predator.
And Ko doesn't kill you when he takes your face. That's the horror. He takes your ability to express emotion, your capacity to ever be recognized by your loved ones, your very identity, and he leaves you alone.
You become a blank, faceless, wandering husk forever.
It is pure Lovecraftian cosmic horror wrapped in the guise of a spiritual trial.
And what about the spirits who are supposed to be wise and helpful? Look at Wan Shi Tong, the giant owl spirit who runs the massive underground spirit library in the desert. He possesses all the knowledge in the world.
And what does he do with it? He sinks his entire magnificent library into the shifting sand, burying it cutting off humanity from it. Because he realized that humans continually, inevitably weaponize the knowledge within it. And if we look at the reality of the geopolitical, the incredibly uncomfortable truth is that he was entirely...
He was. I used to be so mad at him when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But Team Avatar, our heroes, lied right to his face.
It totally did.
They walked into a sacred sanctuary and told him they were there for purely academic reasons. But they were actively, desperately looking for military intelligence. They were looking for the exact date of the solar eclipse so they could plan a massive bloody invasion of the Fire Nation.
Wan Shitong had seen this exact pattern play out for millennia. You give humans knowledge about astronomy, time attack, you give them knowledge about chemistry, they invent explosives.
He wasn't being evil or vindictive.
No, he just finally reached his absolute limit. Even the virtuous heroes of the story proved his fundamental point, that humanity, burdened by its own survival, cannot be trusted in information.
So what does this mean for the Avatar themselves? We always see the Avatar state as this epic ultimate power-up. The glowing eyes, the floating in the air, the massive displays of elementary mastery, the music swells and we cheer.
But what is it really costing Aang, the boy inside the globe?
Right.
From a psychological perspective, the Avatar state is dissociation on a cosmic. When Aang enters the Avatar state, a 12-year-old child loses complete control of his own motor function and his own mind.
He is forcefully shoved into the backseat of his own consciousness.
Exactly. While thousands of dead people, the past avatars, take the wheel, he is literally possessed.
He's a passenger in his own meat suit. It's cosmic identity theft. Congratulations, Aang, you have superpowers. The downside, you're being possessed by a bloodthirsty 400-year-old warrior who wants to level a continent.
Exactly. And look at what usually triggers it. It is rarely a conscious, controlled choice early. It's triggered by extreme emotional trauma, grief, or imminent life threat.
It's his nervous system hitting the ultimate panic button because the child cannot handle the overwhelming stress of the situation.
And it has a massive, undeniable biological cost. The 100 years he spent frozen in that iceberg, kept alive only by the continuous intervention of the Avatar, severely drained his internal.
The lore confirmed that this extended time in the state ultimately shortened his natural lifespan significantly.
Yeah. He dies relatively young for an Avatar because body.
It's often described as a cosmic democracy, drawing on the wisdom of all past lives. But the kid doesn't get a vote. He just blacks out, experiences a surge of incomprehensible rage and power, and wakes up hours later to see the massive destruction the past avatars caused using his own hands.
When you combine that kind of overwhelming cosmic indifference with the systemic, grinding imperial violence earlier, you are left with a world full of victims who fall entirely through the cracks of history.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It is. And the ultimate question of the series becomes, when the 100-year war finally ends, how does the world account for this trauma? Who pays the bill?
Let's start with extinction, because Aang isn't just the last airbender. His entire surrounding ecosystem is functionally extinct.
The show sometimes glosses over the environmental trauma, making it a background detail, but when you focus on it, the scale is staggering.
Appa is one of the absolute last living sky bison.
And we see exactly what happens to a rare sacred creature in a world desensitized to violence in the episode arc, Appa's Lost Day. He is subject to horrifying animals.
He is captured by poachers, starved, beaten, and trafficked to a Fire Nation circus where a sadistic trainer uses fire to terrorize him into doing tricks.
And Momo is the absolute last winged, and the original Firebend, the dragons. They were hunted for sport by the Fire Nation nobility.
It was considered a rite of passage for royalty to kill a dragon until they were believed to be completely, permanently wiped out.
And we actually see the spiritual realm's violent reaction to this environmental destruction early in Season 1 with Heibai, the black and white forest spirit.
Right, Heibai is a gentle protector of the forest. But when the Fire Nation military comes through and clear-cuts his ancient sacred groves, turning it into a barren wasteland of stumps and ash, the spirit literally mutates.
Heibai turns into a massive, multi-armed, terrifying monster and starts violently kidnapping innocent villagers from a nearby.
It is a direct, visceral metaphor for ecological trauma. When the environment is amputated, the spiritual balance collapses into catastrophic, localized violence.
And it's not just the environment falling through the cracks, it's the people. The war creates an invisible refugee crisis, unimaginable. Millions of people are displaced, wandering the earth.
And we see the ultimate distillation of how the world treats them at the Serpent's Pass, this incredibly lethal, monster-infested, narrow sliver of rock bridging a massive ocean.
The Serpent's Pass acts as a lethal, state-sanctioned border policy. The Earth Kingdom capital of Ba Sing Se allows wealthy merchants or documented citizens to take a safe, heavily guarded ferry across the water.
But the undocumented poor, the desperate refugees fleeing burning villages, they are denied entry to the ferry and are forced to risk horrible deaths walking the Serpent's Pass.
It is systematic neglect dressed up as immigration. The government doesn't have to kill the refugees. They just let the geography and the monsters do the dirty work.
Which brings us to the tragic story of Jet. We meet Jet as a charismatic teenager living in the tree, but fundamentally he is a deeply traumatized child refugee.
His parents were brutally killed by the Fire Nation's elite forces, the rough rhinos, right in front of him.
So what happened? He's radicalized by the war. He forms a child guerrilla unit in the forest and starts employing literal terrorist tactics like trying to flood a civilian village to fight back.
When he realizes he's gone too far, He travels to Ba Sing Se to start over, to try and find a peaceful life as a refugee.
And what does the supposed sanctuary city do to him? He discovers the Dalai's corruption, and for his trouble, he is dragged to Lake Laogai and brainwashed by his own government's secret police.
When Team Avatar finally finds him, they trigger his conditioning, and he is forced to attack Aang.
When Jet finally musters the immense willpower to break free of the brainwashing, the Dalai leader, Longfeng, casually, almost effortlessly, strikes him down with a rock in a dark underground base.
His death is incredibly, hauntingly ambiguous. He takes a massive hit to the chest. He tells his friends he'll be fine. Toph, using her seismic lie detection, simply lowers her head and says softly, "He's lying."
And then the main characters just leave him there. They leave him to bleed out in the dark because they have a pressing mission to complete.
It perfectly highlights the expendable casualties of war. Jet's death isn't a glorious, heroic sacrifice on a sunlit battle. It's pointless. It's bleak. He is a traumatized kid who is ground up by the war machine, chewed up by a corrupt government, and ultimately forgotten by the narrative itself. He doesn't get a statue. He doesn't get a funeral.
And that profound lack of closure brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all the myth of post-war justice.
Oh, this is
The series finale is beautiful. It ends with the war over, Zuko taking the throne as the new Fire Lord, Aang and Katara kissing in the sunset, and everyone cheering in a tea shop. But think about the geopolitical reality the next morning.
right.
There are no war crimes tribunals. The Fire Nation generals who committed genocide, the wardens who ran the brutal prison camps, the governors who systematically erased Earth Kingdom culture, they presumably just retired to their estate.
It is the ultimate uncomfortable truth of this series. Let's look at the most beloved character in the entire franchise, Uncle Iroh.
Everybody loves Uncle Iroh. He drinks jasmine tea, he gives profound, life-changing advice, and he genuinely loves his nephew Zuko.
We adore him. He sings Leaves from the Vine, which is objectively the most heartbreaking moment in television.
But we have to look at the whole picture. Why is he singing that song? He is mourning his son, Lu Ten, who died in battle.
But where was that battle? Iroh was the dragon of the West. He was the crown prince and top general of the Fire Nation military. He personally initiated and led a grueling 600-day starvation siege on the civilian city of Ba.
For nearly 2 years, he actively tried to conquer a peaceful city, directly causing untold numbers of civilian and military deaths.
He only stopped and had a spiritual awakening because his own son died in the conquest he orchestrated.
Wait, hold on. I'm struggling with the Iroh point here because it hurts to think about. Are we genuinely saying the narrative lets a man who orchestrated a 2-year siege off the hook just because he suffered a personal tragedy and had a change of heart?
That's the question.
Because the Earth Kingdom civilians who starved inside those walls didn't get a redemption. They just died.
That is exactly the friction the show leaves us with. Iroh is a deeply changed, repentant, and wise man by the time we meet. But does personal enlightenment absolve you of massive war crime?
How does his story end? After the war, he gets a peaceful, idyllic retirement, opening a quaint tea shop in the upper ring of Ba Sing Se, the exact same city he spent 600 days trying to.
It inadvertently teaches a terrifying, very real world. If you're on the winning side at the end, or if you simply switch sides at the 11th hour, offer a sincere apology, and help the new regime, legal accountability.
Justice delayed 100 years is just the air nomads are still, Kaya is still, Force are still, and nobody ever stood trial in front of a judge for it.
The show ultimately chooses to focus on the themes of forgiveness, breaking cycles of violence, and ethically for a narrative aimed at a younger demographic. That is an incredibly powerful,
But the adult reality, the dark lore, is that redemption without formal accountability is just organized systemic forgetting. It's a massive amount to take in. When you truly strip away the childhood nostalgia, the warm blanket of colorful animation, and the goofy penguin sledding moments, it reveals an absolute masterclass in depicting the grueling, unglamorous realities of war, systemic abuse, and multi-generational trauma.
It wasn't just a fun cartoon about kids shooting fire and water. It was a deeply complex, philosophical look at authoritarianism, environmental destruction, and what it actually costs a human soul to survive a century.
It holds a mirror directly up to our own world's history. It forces us, even as adults, to look critically at the mechanics of empire, the cost of conflict, and the incredibly messy, unsatisfying reality of trying to build a peaceful world on a foundation of unpunished atrocity.
It's a heavy legacy for a kids' show.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, building on what we've discussed today. Earlier, we talked about the Avatar state as a collection of past lives taking control of Aang's body. But I want you to really think about the deeply unsettling moral implications of this.
Yeah.
Aang's past lives, Avatars like Kyoshi lived an incredibly brutal, war-torn era. Kyoshi famously admitted to violently killing a tyrant who refused to step down, and she looked on in the eye and said she had zero regrets about doing it.
She did what she had to do.
But if the Avatar state is a literal biological conduit for the collective will of all these past warriors, is the balance that the Avatar constantly seeks actually just the perpetuation of centuries of normalized top-down violence?
That's a chilling.
When Aang taps into that glowing state, he isn't just channeling generic cosmic magic. He's being possessed by the ghosts of humanity's incredibly violent, ruthless past. Are the dead dictating a form of peace that the living can never actually achieve without bloodshed?
That's something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us for this incredibly deep dive into the world of the Avatar. We'll catch you next time.